From the jungles of Central America to the sands of Mesopotamia, from the frozen north to the temples of the Nile, the same story is whispered. A sky god who came down in fire, a flood that cleansed the world, a serpent that taught forbidden knowledge. Civilizations oceans apart, yet they all remember. In 2600 BC, Sumerian scribes carved stories into clay tablets about gods who descended from the heavens to teach humanity the arts of civilization. 3,000 miles away and centuries later, Maya priests painted nearly identical tales onto temple walls. They had never met, never traded, never shared a single word. The Egyptians told of a great deluge that destroyed the world in its early ages. So did the Greeks, so did the Norse, so did the Chinese, so did nearly 300 cultures across every inhabited continent. A dying god who descends into darkness and rises again. Osiris in Egypt, Dionysus in Greece, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Balder in Scandinavia. A cosmic tree connecting heaven and earth. Yggdrasil, the Assyrian sacred tree, the Maya world tree, the Buddhist Bodhi. These are not vague similarities. The details align with uncomfortable precision. For 2 centuries, scholars have tried to explain this pattern. Some say ancient peoples traded stories along forgotten routes. Others claim the human mind naturally creates the same symbols. A few whisper about something older, a single civilization whose memory fractured into myth. We trace the echoes of a single forgotten truth, a story older than history itself. In 1872, a British museum assistant named George Smith was cataloguing clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia. Most were tax records and grain inventories, dry administrative texts from a dead empire. Then he found Tablet 11. The fragment described a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. One righteous man was warned in advance. He built a massive boat and filled it with animals. After the waters receded, he sent out birds to find dry land. The boat came to rest on a mountain. Smith recognized the story immediately. It was Noah's flood, but written 1,000 years before the oldest known biblical text. The tablet was part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, composed around 2100 BC. The hero of the flood wasn't Noah, but Utnapishtim. The mountain wasn't Ararat, but Nisir. But the story, beat for beat, was the same. Smith was so excited he reportedly began removing his clothes in the museum. Victorian propriety aside, he understood what he'd discovered. The Bible's foundational story wasn't unique. It was part of a much older tradition. Within decades, archaeologists found flood myths everywhere they looked. The Akkadian Atrahasis from 1800 BC describes gods who regret creating noisy humans and decide to drown them all. One god warns a righteous man to build a boat. 7 days of rain. The waters cover everything. In ancient Greece, Zeus sends a flood to destroy the corrupt Bronze Age of humanity. Deucalion and Pyrrha survive in a chest and repopulate the earth by throwing stones that become people. Hindu texts describe Manu, warned by a fish avatar of Vishnu about an impending flood. He builds a boat tied to the fish's horn and survives to father a new human race. The Quiché Maya Popol Vuh tells of a great flood of resin that destroyed the wooden people, an early failed attempt at creating humans. Only after this destruction were true humans made from maize. In Chinese tradition, the Emperor Yu tamed catastrophic floods that had drowned the world. In Australian Aboriginal stories, a great flood covered the land after people broke sacred laws. North American tribes from the Algonquin to the Hopi remember a world-destroying deluge. By 1925, Scottish folklorist Sir James Fraser had catalogued flood myths from over 250 cultures. They appeared on every inhabited continent. Many cultures had no contact with each other for thousands of years. But the flood was just the beginning. The more archaeologists excavated, the more patterns appeared. not just similar, eerily identical. Across ancient civilizations, the same cast of characters kept appearing. A sky god who rules from above, usually associated with storms, lightning, and law. Zeus in Greece, Jupiter in Rome, Thor and Odin in Scandinavia, Indra in India, Enlil in Sumer, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica. A dying and rising god who descends into the underworld and returns, associated with agriculture, seasons, and renewal. Osiris in Egypt, murdered and resurrected. Dionysus in Greece, torn apart and reborn. Balder in Norse myth, killed by mistletoe and prophesied to return after Ragnarok. Tammuz in Mesopotamia, descending annually to the underworld. Jesus in Christianity, crucified and risen on the third day. The motif appears in Persia with Mithras, in Phrygia with Attis, in Mexico with Quetzalcoatl. Each dies violently, each descends to darkness, each returns transformed. A serpent or dragon, sometimes evil, sometimes wise, always associated with hidden knowledge. The serpent in Eden offers forbidden fruit. The snake goddess of Minoan Crete guards sacred wisdom. Quetzalcoatl means feathered serpent and brings civilization to humanity. The Nagas of Hindu and Buddhist tradition are semi-divine serpents who guard treasures and sacred knowledge. The rainbow serpent of Aboriginal Australia creates waterholes and teaches law. A cosmic tree or pillar connecting heaven, earth, and underworld. Yggdrasil in Norse cosmology connects 9 worlds. The Assyrian sacred tree appears in palace reliefs as the axis of the universe. The Maya world tree rises from the underworld through the earthly plane to the celestial realm. The tree of life in Kabbalah maps the structure of divine emanation. The Bodhi tree under which Buddha achieved enlightenment. Divine teachers who descend from the sky to civilize humanity. The Sumerian Apkallu, 7 sages sent by Enki before the flood to teach writing, mathematics, and architecture. Viracocha in Andean tradition appears after a great flood, wandering from Tiahuanaco to teach agriculture and law. Quetzalcoatl descends to teach the Toltecs astronomy, agriculture, and writing. Oannes in Babylonian myth emerges from the sea, half man, half fish, to teach civilization. These teachers often arrive after catastrophe. They restore lost knowledge. They promise to return. By the early 20th century, scholars were confronting an uncomfortable question. How could cultures separated by oceans and millennia tell the same stories? In 1910, anthropologist Franz Boas documented flood myths among Pacific Northwest tribes. These were people whose ancestors crossed the Bering Land Bridge over 12,000 years ago. They had been isolated from Eurasia for hundreds of generations, yet they remembered a great deluge that destroyed the first world. The Hopi of the American Southwest tell of 3 previous worlds, each destroyed by catastrophe: flood, ice, fire. The survivors of each destruction carried knowledge into the next world. Hindu cosmology describes 4 yugas, world ages, each ending in destruction and renewal. The Norse speak of multiple worlds before this one, each destroyed and remade. The Maya calendar marks the end of world ages with precision, 13 Baktuns, roughly 5,125 years. The pattern isn't just about what happened, it's about when. Many flood myths include specific details about timing. The Sumerian king list divides history into pre-flood and post-flood dynasties. Before the flood, kings reigned for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years. After the flood, lifespans became recognizably human. The same pattern appears in the Bible. Pre-flood patriarchs living 900 years, post-flood lifespans dropping rapidly to normal human ranges. Egyptian tradition places a golden age far in the past, the first time when gods walked the earth. After a catastrophe, the gods withdrew and left humanity to govern itself. Plato's Timaeus describes Atlantis destroyed 9,000 years before his time. around 9600 BC. He claimed Egyptian priests told the story to Solon, saying their records went back far beyond Greek memory. Something happened, something catastrophic enough that cultures across the world remembered it, something that reset civilization. The archaeological record shows a curious gap. For most of human history, roughly 300,000 years, we were hunter-gatherers, small bands moving with seasons and game. Then, around 10,000 BC, something changed. Agriculture appeared simultaneously in multiple locations: the Fertile Crescent, the Yellow River Valley, Mesoamerica, the Andes, not gradually, but abruptly. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey dates to 9600 BC. It's a massive temple complex with precisely carved pillars weighing 16 tons each. It was built by people who supposedly had no agriculture, no pottery, no metal tools. Then it was deliberately buried and abandoned. Within a few thousand years, cities appeared. Writing systems emerged independently in Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and Mesoamerica. Mathematics, astronomy, monumental architecture all appeared rapidly. It was as if someone hit a switch. Ancient texts describe this transition as the work of divine teachers. The Sumerian god Enki, called Lord of the Earth, is credited with giving humanity the me, the divine decrees that govern civilization. He taught irrigation, writing, law, and sacred ritual. In Egypt, the god Thoth, depicted as an ibis or baboon, gave humans writing, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. He was called the reckoner of times and seasons. Quetzalcoatl descended to the Toltecs and Aztecs as a bearded, light-skinned teacher. He taught astronomy. The Mesoamericans calculated the solar year to 365.2420 days, closer to modern measurements than the European calendar of the same period. He taught agriculture, introducing maize cultivation that transformed their society. He taught mathematics. They independently developed the concept of zero. Viracocha appeared to Andean peoples after a great flood had destroyed previous civilizations. He was described as tall, bearded, and wearing a long white robe. He taught agriculture, architecture, and astronomy, then walked across the Pacific and disappeared, promising to return. The pattern repeats. Divine teachers appear after catastrophe to rebuild civilization. They share forbidden or lost knowledge. They leave, promising return. These teachers are often depicted with the same symbols. Enki is associated with water. He lives in the Abzu, the primordial waters beneath the earth. Oannes emerges from the sea. Quetzalcoatl is linked to both the serpent and the sea. Viracocha walks across water. They often carry similar objects, a staff or rod, symbols of measurement and order. Egyptian gods hold the Waz scepter. Mesopotamian gods carry measuring rods and lines. Andean depictions show divine figures with staffs. They teach the same core arts: agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, and sacred architecture. The question becomes sharper. Are these independent inventions of the human imagination creating the same archetypes? Or are they memories? The oldest creation myths don't begin on Earth. They begin in the sky. In the Sumerian epic of creation, the Enuma Elish, the universe begins as two primordial entities, Apsu, the fresh water, and Tiamat, the salt water. They mingle and give birth to the first gods. These younger gods are noisy and disruptive. Apsu plots to destroy them, but the god Enki learns of the plan and kills Apsu first. Tiamat, enraged, creates an army of monsters to avenge her consort. The young god Marduk defeats her, splitting her body in half. One half becomes the sky, the other the earth. From her blood mixed with clay, humans are created to serve the gods. This isn't a gentle creation by a benevolent deity. It's violent, cosmic war, resulting in the structuring of reality. The same pattern appears across cultures. In Greek myth, the Titans, primordial giants, are overthrown by the younger Olympian gods in a war called the Titanomachy. Zeus and his siblings defeat their father Cronus and the Old Order. The victorious Olympians establish themselves on Mount Olympus and create humanity. Norse mythology tells of the Aesir-Vanir War, two races of gods battling for supremacy. Eventually they establish peace, but the memory of cosmic conflict defines their universe. The world itself, Midgard, is created from the body of the slain giant Ymir. In Hindu cosmology, the Devas and Asuras, gods and anti-gods, wage eternal war for control of the universe. Neither side is purely good or evil. The balance between them maintains cosmic order. Egyptian myth describes the war between Horus and Set, order versus chaos, played out eternally across the cosmos. Why do so many cultures remember heaven as a war zone? The gods, once victorious, descend to earth, but their arrival is rarely peaceful. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki, literally those who from heaven to earth came. They weren't metaphorical. The texts treat them as physical beings who arrived in flying boats, who needed food and shelter, who interbred with humans. The book of Genesis contains a curious passage. Genesis 6:1-4. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. The offspring of these unions were the Nephilim, giants who became mighty men of renown. This passage was so troubling to later theologians that many tried to reinterpret it. But the text is clear. Divine beings descended and interbred with humans. The Book of Enoch, removed from most biblical canons but preserved in Ethiopian Christianity, expands the story. 200 watchers, angels, descended to Mount Hermon. They took human wives and taught forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, weaponry, cosmetics, sorcery, astronomy. Their offspring, the Nephilim, became corrupt and violent. God decided to cleanse the earth with a flood. The same motif appears in Greek myth. The Olympians frequently descend to earth and father demigods, Hercules, Perseus, Achilles. These half-divine heroes bridge the gap between gods and humans. Prometheus, a titan, steals fire from the gods and gives it to humanity along with the arts of civilization. Zeus punishes him savagely, chained to a rock where an eagle eats his regenerating liver for eternity. The crime wasn't just theft, it was giving humans knowledge meant only for the divine. In Mesoamerican tradition, Quetzalcoatl descends from the heavens and walks among humans as both god and teacher. The Aztecs described him as tall, bearded, light-skinned, unlike themselves. He taught them agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, which transformed their society. He taught writing and the calendar. He taught astronomy. The Aztec calendar stone encodes sophisticated astronomical knowledge. After a period of teaching, Quetzalcoatl departed. Some versions say he sailed away on a raft of serpents. Others say he immolated himself and his heart became the morning star, Venus. All versions agree he promised to return in a specific year. When Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519, the Aztec emperor Moctezuma believed he might be Quetzalcoatl returning as prophesied. The year matched the calendar predictions. This belief contributed to the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Similar stories appear in the Andes. Viracocha appeared after a great flood. He was described as tall, with a beard and white robes. He traveled through the Andes performing miracles and teaching. At Tiahuanaco, he created humanity from clay and gave different peoples their languages and customs. Then he walked westward across the Pacific Ocean and vanished. When Francisco Pizarro arrived in 1532, Inca oral tradition remembered Viracocha's promise to return. Again, this belief facilitated conquest. The pattern is consistent. Divine or semi-divine beings descend from the sky. They teach humanity the foundational arts of civilization. They often interbreed with humans. they depart, promising to return. But there's another element. The knowledge they bring is often described as forbidden. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent offers Eve fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God had forbidden this fruit. The serpent tells Eve, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Eve eats, Adam eats, their eyes are opened. God expels them from paradise, saying, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever." Humanity gains knowledge, but loses immortality. The serpent in this story is punished, cursed to crawl on its belly, but it told the truth. Humanity did become like God, gaining knowledge. Across cultures, the serpent plays an ambiguous role, sometimes villain, sometimes teacher. In ancient Egypt, the uraeus, the rearing cobra, adorns the crown of pharaohs, symbolizing divine authority and protection. The god Wadjet, depicted as a cobra, protects Lower Egypt. Serpents guard hidden knowledge and the passage between worlds. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the Nagas are divine or semi-divine serpent beings. They guard treasures and esoteric wisdom. Buddha was protected by the serpent king Mukalinda during meditation. Nagas are generally benevolent, though they can be dangerous if disrespected. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brings civilization to Mesoamerica. The serpent represents earthly wisdom, the feathers represent celestial knowledge. He is the bridge between earth and sky. Australian Aboriginal traditions include the rainbow serpent, a creator deity who shaped the landscape and established law. It brings both water and drought, life and death. Respect for the rainbow serpent is fundamental to Aboriginal spirituality. Even in Greek myth, snakes symbolize healing and wisdom. Asclepius, god of medicine, carries a staff with a serpent coiled around it, still the symbol of medicine today. The serpent represents hidden knowledge, transformation, and the boundary between divine and human. So the pattern becomes clear. Gods descend from the sky. They teach humanity forbidden knowledge through a mediator, often serpent-associated. This knowledge transforms humanity, but also separates us from the divine. The gods withdraw or are driven back to heaven. Humanity is left to navigate existence with newfound knowledge, but without direct divine presence. There's another curious consistency, the description of how these gods traveled. Ancient texts don't speak metaphorically about divine journeys. They describe vehicles. In the Hindu Ramayana and Mahabharata, the gods pilot vimanas, flying palaces or chariots. The descriptions are remarkably detailed. The vimanas have propulsion systems, weapons, navigation equipment. They can travel vast distances, underwater and through the air. The Pushpaka Vimana in the Ramayana is described as a flying palace large enough to accommodate many people. It could travel anywhere its pilot commanded. The text describes how it flew, not like a bird flapping wings, but propelled by some internal mechanism. The prophet Ezekiel, in the Hebrew Bible, describes seeing a divine chariot in meticulous detail. Wheels within wheels, brilliant lights, the sound of rushing waters. It descended from the sky in fire and wind. The Book of Enoch describes the watchers descending in fiery chariots to Mount Hermon. Sumerian texts describe the gods traveling in boats of heaven. These weren't metaphors for clouds. The texts distinguish between natural clouds and the vehicles of the gods. In the Epic of Etana, a Sumerian king is carried to heaven on the back of an eagle to receive the plant of birth. The text describes the journey in stages, the earth growing smaller beneath him, the sea becoming like a garden, the land like breadcrumbs. This is a description of ascending to altitude, not a mystical vision. Japanese Shinto tradition includes the Torifune, a bird-shaped boat that carried gods from the heavens to earth. Native American traditions, particularly among Southwest tribes, describe sky people arriving in flying shields or silvery objects. Hopi tradition speaks of the flying shields of the Kachinas, spirit beings who taught humanity. Dogon tradition in West Africa describes the Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from the sky in an ark that spun and made a loud noise. They came from the star Sirius to teach humanity. The Dogon astronomical knowledge has puzzled researchers. They knew about Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, long before modern telescopes confirmed its existence. Are these primitive peoples describing advanced technology in the only terms available to them? Or are they simply using poetic language for spiritual experiences? The question can't be easily dismissed because the myths contain specific details that shouldn't be there. The Dogon knowledge of Sirius B is one example. The Maya calculated the length of the solar year to 365.2420 days. Modern astronomy calculates 365.2422. They tracked Venus with precision, knowing its cycles intimately. They predicted eclipses. How did they acquire this knowledge? The Maya said Kukulkan, another name for Quetzalcoatl, taught them. The Sumerians developed sophisticated mathematics. They used base 60, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. They understood lunar cycles and predicted astronomical events. They said the Apkallu taught them. Ancient Egypt aligned the Great Pyramid to true north with precision, just 3/60ths of a degree off. The pyramid encodes mathematical constants. Pi and phi appear in its proportions. The Egyptians said Thoth gave them this knowledge. The pattern holds, advanced knowledge attributed to divine teachers who descended from the sky. But then something happened. The gods withdrew. In Sumerian tradition, the Apkallu ceased appearing after the flood. In Greek myth, the age of heroes, when gods regularly interacted with humans, ended. In Egyptian tradition, the first time ended and the gods departed, leaving humanity to rule through the pharaohs as intermediaries. Norse mythology prophesies Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the divine order will collapse. But Ragnarok isn't the first destruction. The myths remember previous worlds. Across cultures, there's a memory of direct divine interaction followed by withdrawal. Humanity inherits knowledge, but loses the teachers. What severed the connection? The myths agree: catastrophe. Water covers everything. This is not metaphor, not allegory. 300 cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, remember when water drowned the world. The details shift. Some floods last 40 days, others 7, still others cover the earth for a year, but the core elements remain constant. Divine anger or cosmic upheaval triggers the flood. Humanity is warned, sometimes by a sympathetic god, sometimes by signs and omens. A righteous person or small group builds a vessel and survives. After the waters recede, the survivors repopulate the earth. A covenant or promise is made. The gods won't destroy the world this way again. Why does humanity remember this? Around 12,800 years ago, something happened to Earth's climate. The planet was emerging from the last ice age. Massive ice sheets covered North America and Europe. Temperatures were gradually warming. Then, abruptly, the warming stopped. Temperatures plunged back to near glacial levels. This period, called the Younger Dryas, lasted roughly 1,200 years. Around 9,600 BC, the cold snap ended as abruptly as it began. Temperatures shot upward. The ice sheets collapsed. Meltwater flooded into the oceans. Sea levels rose over 300 feet. Coastlines where humans had lived for thousands of years vanished beneath the waves. The Mediterranean basin, the Persian Gulf, the Black Sea, all experienced catastrophic flooding. In 1997, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman published evidence that the Black Sea was once a freshwater lake, 550 feet below its current level. Around 5,600 BC, rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosphorus Strait. Water thundered through the narrow gap with a force 200 times greater than Niagara Falls. The Black Sea filled rapidly, drowning coastal settlements. Survivors would have fled in all directions, carrying memories of apocalypse. This event is too recent to explain Sumerian flood myths from 2100 BC or earlier, but it shows that catastrophic floods did occur within human memory. The earlier event, the end of the Younger Dryas around 9600 BC, was more global. Ice cores from Greenland show temperature rising 10 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. That's geological impossibility, except it happened. What could cause such rapid climate change? One theory, proposed by scientists including Richard Firestone and Alan West, suggests a comet impact or airburst. Around 12,800 years ago, a comet may have fragmented and struck the Laurentide ice sheet covering North America. The impacts would have vaporized trillions of tons of ice instantly. The water vapor would have created unprecedented storms. Debris in the atmosphere would have blocked sunlight, triggering the Younger Dryas cold period. Evidence for this impact hypothesis includes a layer of sediment dating to exactly this period, found across North America and parts of Europe. The layer contains nano-diamonds, magnetic spherules, and shocked quartz, markers of cosmic impact. Göbekli Tepe, the mysterious temple complex in Turkey, contains stone pillars covered in reliefs. One pillar, called the Vulture Stone, depicts various animals and symbols. In 2017, researchers using astronomical software suggested the symbols might represent constellations as they appeared around 10,950 BC. The carvings might commemorate a cosmic disaster. Whether or not a comet struck, something catastrophic occurred. The megafauna, mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, went extinct rapidly. The Clovis culture of North America disappeared. When temperatures finally stabilized, human societies reorganized in new ways. Agriculture appeared. Cities rose. And everywhere people told stories about the deluge. The Sumerian flood story, part of the Atrahasis epic, describes the gods growing annoyed with noisy humans. The god Enlil convinces the other gods to send a flood to destroy humanity. But Enki, who created humans, warns his favorite, Atrahasis. Tear down your house, build a boat. Abandon possessions, save life. Atrahasis builds a cube-shaped vessel, loads it with animals and craftspeople, and seals it with bitumen. The storm arrives, 7 days and nights of rain. Even the gods are terrified by the destruction they've unleashed. When the waters recede, Atrahasis offers a sacrifice. The gods, gathered like flies around the offering, smell the savor and regret their decision. They realize humanity serves a purpose. Enlil is furious that someone survived but eventually accepts it. The Epic of Gilgamesh retells the same story. Gilgamesh, seeking immortality, visits Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who was granted eternal life by the gods. Utnapishtim's story parallels Noah's in uncanny detail. He's warned by the god Ea, another name for Enki. Tear down your house, build a boat. The boat's dimensions are specified, 120 cubits in each direction, 7 decks. The storm is apocalyptic. For 6 days and 6 nights the wind blew, the downpour, the tempest, and the flood overwhelmed the land. Even the gods cowered like dogs. On the 7th day, the storm subsides. Utnapishtim opens a hatch and sees devastation. All of humankind had returned to clay. The boat comes to rest on Mount Nisir. Utnapishtim sends out birds, a dove, a swallow, a raven, to find dry land. The raven doesn't return, indicating land. He offers sacrifice. The gods gather. Enlil arrives. Furious, someone survived. Ea scolds Enlil for acting rashly. Eventually, Enlil blesses Utnapishtim and his wife with immortality. The biblical account in Genesis echoes every element. God sees that humanity has become corrupt and violent. He regrets creating them and decides to send a flood, but Noah finds favor. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. The dimensions are given: 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high. Noah builds the ark, loads animals 2 by 2, and enters with his family. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Rain falls 40 days and nights. The waters rise 15 cubits above the highest mountains. Every living thing perishes. After months, the ark rests on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sends out birds, a raven, then a dove 3 times. The dove returns with an olive branch, indicating subsiding waters. Noah builds an altar and sacrifices. God smells the pleasing aroma and makes a covenant. Never again will he destroy the earth by flood. The rainbow appears as a sign of the covenant. The parallels aren't coincidental. These are variations of the same story. But the story isn't confined to the Middle East. The Hindu Matsya Purana describes Manu, the first man, warned of a coming flood by a small fish. The fish grows enormous and reveals itself as Vishnu. Manu builds a boat and ties it to the fish's horn. The flood destroys everything. Vishnu tows Manu to safety on a mountain. After the waters recede, Manu performs austerities and a woman emerges from his sacrifice. Together they father the new human race. Greek myth tells of Deucalion, son of Prometheus, who survives a flood sent by Zeus to destroy the corrupt Bronze Age of humanity. Warned by his father, Deucalion builds a chest and survives 9 days of rain. When the waters recede, he lands on Mount Parnassus. He and his wife Pyrrha repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders. The stones become people. Chinese tradition preserves the story of Gun Yu, who tamed catastrophic floods that had drowned the world. The Emperor Yu became a hero for controlling waters that had destroyed previous civilizations. Earlier versions speak of Nuwa, a goddess who repaired the broken sky after a great deluge. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec creation myth describes 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by catastrophe. The 4th world ended in a great flood. Atonatiuh, the water sun. The gods warned one couple, who survived in a hollow log and repopulated the earth. The Maya Popol Vuh describes a flood of resin that destroyed the wooden people, an early, imperfect attempt at creating humans. A great flood was made. It came down upon the heads of the wooden people. Everything turned against them. Even their cooking pots and grinding stones rose up to attack them. Andean tradition speaks of Viracocha appearing after a great flood had destroyed previous civilizations. The flood came because people had forgotten the gods. Only a few survived on mountain peaks. Viracocha recreated humanity from clay. North American tribes preserve detailed flood narratives. The Ojibwe tell of Nanabojo, who survives a flood sent by angry water spirits. He floats on a log with animals. They dive to retrieve mud from beneath the waters. From this mud, Nanabojo recreates the land. The Hopi remember 3 previous worlds, each destroyed when people became corrupt. The 3rd world ended in flood. The faithful were sealed in hollow reeds and floated to safety. They emerged into the 4th world, the current one, through a sipapu, an opening in the earth. The Lenape tell of a great flood that covered the mountains. Only those on the back of a great turtle survived. After the waters receded, the turtle's back became North America. Australian Aboriginal traditions describe Tidalik, a giant frog who drank all the water in the world, then released it in a catastrophic flood when he laughed. Other traditions speak of a great flood that reshaped the land when people broke sacred laws. Pacific Island cultures remember rising waters. Hawaiian tradition speaks of a great flood sent by the gods. Nu'u built a great canoe and floated with his family and animals. When the waters receded, he made offerings to the gods. The consistency is extraordinary. A world-destroying deluge, divine warning, a righteous survivor, a vessel of salvation, animals saved, mountain refuge, birds sent to find land, sacrifice and covenant, repopulation. These aren't vague similarities. The narrative structure is identical across cultures that had no contact. 3 possible explanations emerge. First, local floods occurred everywhere, and humans naturally invented similar stories. But this doesn't explain the specific details. Why do cultures from Mesopotamia to Mexico to the Pacific all remember sending out birds? Why do they remember a righteous man warned by a god? Local floods don't generate identical narrative patterns. Second, the stories spread through ancient trade routes and cultural contact. This explains some similarities, particularly in the ancient Near East where cultures did interact. The Sumerian, Akkadian, and Hebrew versions clearly share a common source. But it doesn't explain how Australian Aboriginals, isolated for 50,000 years, tell flood stories. It doesn't explain why Native American tribes, separated from Eurasia for 12,000 years, remember the same catastrophe. Trade routes can't cross time. Third, humanity witnessed a real global catastrophe. The memory fragmented as populations dispersed. Each culture adapted the story to local context. But the core event, water destroying the world, remained consistent because it actually happened. The geological evidence supports catastrophic flooding at the end of the Ice Age. Sea levels rose over 300 feet as ice sheets melted. Coastal settlements, where most humans lived, vanished. Low-lying river valleys flooded. Entire landscapes drowned. The Persian Gulf was dry land during the Ice Age, a fertile river valley where early civilizations may have flourished. Rising waters submerged it around 8,000 years ago. The Sumerians, who emerged in this region, may have preserved memories of that drowning. The Bering land bridge connecting Asia to North America flooded around 11,000 years ago. The English Channel formed around 6,500 BC when rising waters breached the land connection between Britain and Europe. Doggerland, a vast landmass connecting Britain to continental Europe, was home to thriving Mesolithic communities. Over several thousand years, it gradually submerged. Around 6,200 BC, a massive underwater landslide off Norway, the Storegga Slide, triggered a tsunami that finished drowning Doggerland. People living in these regions witnessed their world drown. Survivors carried the trauma in oral tradition. But there's more to the flood myths than just water. Many describe celestial phenomena accompanying the deluge. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the storm is terrifying. The wide land was shattered like a pot. For one day, the south storm blew, gathering speed as it blew, submerging the mountains. The description suggests more than rain, perhaps earthquakes, volcanic activity, or cosmic impacts. The Book of Enoch describes the flood as punishment for the Watcher's transgression. Before the flood, the earth became corrupt through the teaching of Azazel, who taught weapons and cosmetics and sorcery. The flood comes to cleanse this corruption. In Genesis, the waters come from 2 sources. The fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. This dual source suggests both terrestrial and celestial upheaval. Some researchers suggest the flood myths may remember a comet impact. A comet striking the ice sheets would cause rapid melting. Debris in the atmosphere would create devastating storms. The impact itself would appear as fire from heaven. Plato's account of Atlantis, told to him by Egyptian priests, places the island's destruction around 9,600 BC. He writes that it was destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. There occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of rain, the island of Atlantis disappeared and was swallowed by the sea. Whether or not Atlantis was real, the date is significant. 9600 BC is precisely when the Younger Dryas cold period ended and rapid warming began. It's when Göbekli Tepe was built. It's when human civilization suddenly accelerated. The flood myths all agree on timing. There was a world before, destroyed by catastrophe. After the flood, a new world began. The Sumerian king list divides history at the flood. Before the flood, kings reigned for absurdly long periods, 43,200 years, 28,800 years. After the flood, lifespans drop to recognizable human ranges. Genesis does the same. Pre-flood patriarchs live 900 years. Post-flood generations live progressively shorter lives. This might be mythic exaggeration, but it might also encode memory of a different world. Egyptian tradition speaks of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked the earth. After a catastrophe, the gods withdrew. The pharaohs served as intermediaries between the divine and human realms. The Egyptian priest Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, claimed Egyptian records stretched back over 36,000 years. Most scholars dismiss this as mythic inflation. But what if Egyptian civilization preserved memories from an earlier time? The Sphinx has puzzled researchers for decades. Conventional archaeology dates it to around 2500 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra. But geologist Robert Schoch noted that the Sphinx shows evidence of extensive water erosion. The Giza Plateau hasn't experienced that kind of rainfall in thousands of years. The erosion patterns suggest the Sphinx is much older, possibly carved when the climate was wetter, before 5000 BC or even earlier. If the Sphinx predates conventional Egyptian chronology, it suggests an earlier, forgotten civilization. The same question arises at sites across the world. Göbekli Tepe shouldn't exist. Hunter-gatherers aren't supposed to build massive stone temples. Yet there it stands, dated to 9600 BC. The sophistication of the carving and the organization required to move 16-ton pillars suggests a level of social complexity that shouldn't exist yet. Then, around 8000 BC, it was deliberately buried. Someone carefully filled in the entire complex and abandoned it. Why? At Tiahuanaco in Bolivia, massive stone structures sit at 12,000 feet elevation. The Gateway of the Sun weighs 10 tons and is carved from a single block. Conventional dating places it around 500 AD, but some researchers note that Tiahuanaco sits on the ancient shoreline of Lake Titicaca, which was much larger in the past. If the city was built as a port, it might date to a time when the lake level was higher, thousands of years earlier. The megalithic structures at Baalbek in Lebanon include the largest worked stones ever quarried. The stone of the pregnant woman weighs over 1,000 tons. Roman temples sit atop even older foundations. No one knows who cut and moved these stones, or how. The flood myths suggest an answer. There was a world before, an advanced civilization that left traces. Then catastrophe struck. Most knowledge was lost, but survivors carried fragments, stories of gods who taught, of a deluge that reset the world, of a time when humanity lived differently. The myths preserve what history forgot. A god descends to the underworld. He dies. 3 days pass. He rises, transformed. This pattern appears so consistently across cultures that by the early 20th century, scholars gave it a name: the dying and rising god motif. Egyptian Osiris, Greek Dionysus, Phrygian Attis, Mesopotamian Tammuz, Norse Balder, Syrian Adonis. Each culture tells the same essential story. Why? The oldest and most detailed version comes from Egypt. Osiris, god of agriculture and civilization, rules as king of Egypt during a golden age. He teaches humanity agriculture, law, and sacred ritual. The world prospers under his benevolent rule. But his brother Set, god of chaos, storms, and the desert, grows jealous. Set crafts a beautiful coffin, precisely sized to fit Osiris. At a feast, Set announces he will give the coffin to whoever fits inside perfectly. Osiris, unsuspecting, lies down in the coffin. Set and his conspirators slam the lid shut, seal it, and throw it into the Nile. The coffin floats downstream and out to sea, eventually washing up on the coast of Phoenicia. Isis, wife and sister of Osiris, searches desperately. She finds the coffin encased in a tree that has grown around it. She retrieves her husband's body and returns to Egypt. But Set discovers the body. In rage, he tears Osiris into 14 pieces and scatters them across Egypt. Isis searches again, finding 13 pieces. The 14th, his phallus, has been eaten by fish. She fashions a replacement from gold. Using magic, Isis temporarily resurrects Osiris. She transforms into a bird and hovers over his body, conceiving their son Horus. Osiris cannot remain in the world of the living. He descends to the underworld to become lord of the dead and judge of souls. But he has been transformed. He is no longer merely a god of life, but a god of resurrection. Horus, when he comes of age, battles Set for the throne. The conflict is brutal. Set tears out one of Horus's eyes. Horus castrates Set. Eventually the gods intervene and award the throne to Horus. Order triumphs over chaos. But Osiris's death and resurrection become the central mystery of Egyptian religion. Every pharaoh, upon death, becomes Osiris. Every son who succeeds the throne becomes Horus. The cycle of death and rebirth, of descent and return, defines the Egyptian understanding of existence. Common Egyptians hoped to share in Osiris's resurrection. The elaborate burial practices, the Book of the Dead, the careful preservation of the body, all aimed at following Osiris through death to new life. The pattern repeats across the Mediterranean. In Greece, Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and transformation, is born to Zeus and a mortal woman. Hera, Zeus's jealous wife, drives the infant's guardians mad. The Titans capture the child, tear him to pieces, and boil him in a cauldron. Athena rescues his heart. Zeus consumes the heart, and Dionysus is reborn from Zeus's thigh. Dionysus becomes the god of resurrection, of life emerging from death, of transformation through destruction. His cult centered on mysteries, secret rituals that promised initiates a share in his resurrection. The Eleusinian Mysteries, Greece's most important religious rites, centered on Persephone, daughter of the grain goddess Demeter. Hades, god of the underworld, abducts Persephone and drags her below. Demeter, grieving, causes the earth to become barren. Zeus negotiates. Persephone must spend part of each year in the underworld with Hades, returning to the surface for the rest. When she descends, winter comes. When she rises, spring returns. The myth explains the agricultural cycle, but it's more than metaphor. The mysteries promised initiates that they, like Persephone, would descend to death and rise again. In Phrygia and Rome, the cult of Attis told a similar story. Attis, beloved of the mother goddess Cybele, castrates and kills himself beneath a pine tree. Cybele resurrects him, and he becomes a god of vegetation and rebirth. His festival involved 3 days of mourning, followed by joyous celebration of his resurrection. Devotees would sometimes castrate themselves in ecstatic frenzy, dying symbolically to their old lives. In Mesopotamia, Tammuz, called Dumuzi in Sumerian, is consort to the goddess Inanna or Ishtar. When Inanna descends to the underworld, she must provide a substitute to take her place. She finds Tammuz sitting on her throne, not mourning her absence. Enraged, she consigns him to the underworld. Tammuz's descent brings death to vegetation. His sister negotiates his return. He spends half the year in the underworld, half above. When he rises, life returns to the land. The prophet Ezekiel in the Hebrew Bible condemns women for weeping for Tammuz at the temple in Jerusalem. Even among monotheists, the dying god's cult persisted. In Syria and Phoenicia, Adonis, whose name means Lord, dies during a boar hunt. Aphrodite, his lover, mourns him. From his blood, anemones bloom. Zeus grants Aphrodite's plea. Adonis spends part of each year in the underworld, part with her on earth. Women celebrated the Adonia festival, planting gardens of Adonis, quick-growing plants in small pots that withered quickly, symbolizing the god's brief life. In Norse mythology, Balder is the most beloved of the gods, beautiful, wise, kind. He dreams of his own death. Frigg, his mother, extracts oaths from every object in the world not to harm Balder, except mistletoe, which she deems too young and harmless. Loki, the trickster, fashions a dart from mistletoe. He tricks the blind god Hod into throwing it at Balder. Balder dies. The gods send an emissary to the underworld to beg for Balder's release. Hel, queen of the dead, agrees. If every being in the world will weep for Balder, all weep except one giantess, Loki in disguise. Balder remains dead. But Norse prophecy says that after Ragnarok, the destruction of this world, Balder will return in the new world, resurrected and glorified. The pattern is consistent. A beloved god, often associated with vegetation and fertility, dies violently or tragically. He descends to the underworld. He rises again, either annually or at the end of time. His death and resurrection promise the same transformation to his followers. Christianity fits this pattern precisely. Jesus of Nazareth, fully divine and fully human, is betrayed and killed. He dies on a Friday afternoon. For 3 days, he lies in a tomb, descended to the realm of the dead. On Sunday morning, he rises, transformed, still himself, but glorified, no longer subject to death. His resurrection promises resurrection to all who follow him. I am the resurrection and the life, he says in John's Gospel. Whoever believes in me will live, even though they die. Early critics of Christianity noted the parallels. Celsus, a 2nd century philosopher, accused Christians of plagiarizing pagan myths. Justin Martyr, an early Christian apologist, acknowledged the similarities, but argued that demons had created false versions of the true story in advance to confuse people. Modern scholars offer different explanations. Some argue the dying god motif emerges naturally from agricultural societies observing the cycle of seasons. Seeds die in the ground before sprouting. Plants wither in autumn and return in spring. The agricultural cycle becomes a template for understanding death and rebirth. But this doesn't explain the specificity. Why 3 days? Osiris is dead. 3 days before Isis finds his coffin. Inanna spends 3 days in the underworld. Jesus rises on the 3rd day. Why dismemberment or violent death? Osiris is torn into 14 pieces. Dionysus is ripped apart by titans. Attis castrates himself. Jesus is crucified. Why descent to the underworld specifically? All these gods don't just die. They descend to the realm of the dead, confront death directly, and then ascend. Carl Jung argued, the dying god represents an archetype, a universal pattern in the human psyche. Every human confronts the reality of death. The dying god provides a narrative framework for understanding death as transformation rather than annihilation. The descent into the underworld mirrors psychological descent, depression, trauma, loss of identity. The resurrection represents psychological rebirth, integration, healing, transformation. Jung's theory explains why the motif appears across cultures. It emerges from universal human psychology. But there's another possibility. What if the myths preserve memory of an actual event? Not a literal god dying and rising, but a figure, perhaps multiple figures, who were deified after death. Ancient kings often became gods. Egyptian pharaohs were divine. Roman emperors were deified after death. Sumerian kings claimed divine descent. Perhaps the dying god myths remember actual rulers who transformed their societies, died, and were remembered as gods. Osiris is credited with teaching agriculture and civilization to Egypt. Dionysus taught viticulture and winemaking. Quetzalcoatl brought agriculture, astronomy, and law to Mesoamerica. These aren't just gods, they're culture heroes who fundamentally transformed society. Their deaths may represent actual historical violence. Revolutionary leaders are often murdered by those who resist change. Their resurrections may represent the survival of their teachings. The leader dies, but the movement continues. The seeds they planted bear fruit in later generations. Over time, memory transforms history into myth. The teacher becomes divine. The murder becomes cosmic drama. The survival of their influence becomes literal resurrection. This theory doesn't require dismissing the myths as mere fiction. Instead, it suggests they preserve historical memory in mythic form. The dying god motif appears beyond the Mediterranean world. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl descends into the underworld to retrieve the bones of previous humans. He mixes them with his own blood to create the current human race. Then he departs, promising to return. Variants of the myth describe him burning himself on a funeral pyre, his heart ascending to become Venus, the morning and evening star. Venus disappears from the sky for 8 days, 3 as evening star, 5 in the underworld, then reappears as morning star. The Maya tracked Venus obsessively, linking its cycle to the god's death and resurrection. In Hindu tradition, Krishna, an avatar of Vishnu, is killed by a hunter's arrow that strikes his heel. He ascends to heaven, promising to return in the next age when the world needs him. Buddhist tradition tells of the Buddha entering nirvana, a kind of death to the world. But his teachings promise that others can follow the same path to enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhism developed the concept of bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who delay final nirvana to help others. The pattern transcends geography and culture. A divine or semi-divine figure brings transformative knowledge. They die violently or depart. They promise return or resurrection. Their followers await the fulfillment of that promise. This creates what scholars call messianic expectation, the belief that a savior figure will return to restore the Golden Age. Judaism developed messianic expectation after the Babylonian exile. Prophets predicted a coming king who would restore Israel. Christianity identified Jesus as that Messiah and added a second coming prophecy. Islam awaits the Mahdi, the rightly guided one who will appear before the Day of Judgment. Shia Muslims believe the 12th Imam disappeared in the 9th century and will return. Aztecs awaited Quetzalcoatl's return, a belief that shaped their response to Spanish conquest. Andean peoples expected Viracocha to return from across the ocean. Norse mythology prophesies that after Ragnarok, the destruction of this world, Balder and other gods will return to rule a new, purified world. Hindu cosmology predicts Kalki, the 10th avatar of Vishnu, will appear at the end of the Kali Yuga to destroy evil and restore Dharma. The same pattern. A savior came, taught, left, and will return when needed most. Why does humanity carry this expectation? Perhaps because we remember when the teachers were among us. We remember the golden age before catastrophe. We remember losing direct contact with the divine or with advanced knowledge. The myths say the gods withdrew after the flood. Humanity was left to manage with inherited knowledge, but without the teachers. We've been waiting for their return ever since. At the center of the world stands a tree. Its roots reach deep into the underworld. Its trunk rises through the earthly realm. Its branches touch the heavens. This image appears in cultures so distant from each other that contact seems impossible. Yet they all saw the same tree. In Norse cosmology, Yggdrasil is an immense ash tree at the center of existence. Its 3 roots extend to 3 realms, one to Asgard, home of the gods, one to Jotunheim, land of giants, one to Niflheim, the realm of ice and the dead. 9 worlds nestle in its branches. Gods, humans, giants, elves, dwarves, and the dead all inhabit different levels of the tree. A serpent called Nidhogg gnaws at the roots, trying to destroy the tree. An eagle perches in the highest branches. A squirrel named Ratatosk runs up and down the trunk, carrying insults between the eagle and the serpent. Yggdrasil is not just a symbol, it's the structure of reality itself. If the tree falls, existence ends. Halfway across the world, the Maya envisioned the same structure. The Waka Chan, the world tree, rises from Xibalba, the underworld, through the earthly plane into the 13 layers of heaven. It's often depicted as a cross, the vertical axis connecting underworld to sky, the horizontal axis marking the 4 cardinal directions. At the top of the tree perches the principal bird deity, often identified with the celestial realm. At the base, the Xibalban serpent guards the entrance to the underworld. The Maya king, in ritual, would enter trance states to climb the world tree, traveling between realms to communicate with ancestors and gods. Thousands of miles away, in Mesopotamia, the Assyrians carved images of the sacred tree on palace walls. Scholars still debate what tree it represents. Some say date palm, others say no earthly tree at all, but a cosmic symbol. The tree appears flanked by protective spirits or by the king himself. It represents divine order, the axis around which the cosmos revolves. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero travels to a garden at the edge of the world where a sacred tree grows. This tree bears jewels instead of fruit, lapis lazuli, carnelian, and other precious stones. It's guarded by scorpion beings who prevent mortals from approaching. In the Garden of Eden, 2 trees stand at the center, the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Humanity gains access to one, but is barred from the other. After Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, God says, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever." God expels them from Eden and places cherubim with a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. The image recurs in the final book of the Bible. In Revelation, John envisions the New Jerusalem where the tree of life grows on either side of the river of life. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Humanity regains access to what was lost in Eden. Hindu and Buddhist traditions center on cosmic trees. The Bodhi tree under which Buddha achieved enlightenment becomes a symbol of awakening. Pilgrims still visit descendants of that tree in Bodh Gaya. The Bhagavad Gita describes the Ashvata, the eternal fig tree with roots in heaven and branches stretching to earth. It represents the inverted nature of spiritual reality. What appears above is rooted below. What appears below reaches to the heights. The Kabbalistic tree of life maps the structure of divine emanation through 10 sephirot, divine attributes through which the infinite becomes manifest. Each sephirah is a branch or node on the tree connecting the divine to the material world. In West African cosmology, particularly among the Yoruba, the Iroko tree serves as axis mundi, the world axis connecting earth to heaven. Spirits dwell in sacred trees, and certain trees serve as portals between worlds. Australian Aboriginal traditions speak of sacred trees that mark dreamtime sites, places where the ancestral beings performed creative acts that shaped the world. Central Asian shamanic traditions feature the world tree as the path shamans climb in trance to reach the spirit world. The drum represents this tree. Its frame is made from the wood of a sacred tree, and beating the drum is climbing the tree. The tree motif isn't isolated. It's always accompanied by specific symbols. Birds perch in the branches. Serpents coil at the roots. Water often flows from or near the tree. Why these specific elements? Mircea Eliade, the historian of religions, argued that the world tree represents axis mundi, the cosmic axis around which reality is organized. Every sacred space replicates this pattern. Temples, pyramids, mountains, all serve as substitute world trees, places where heaven and earth connect. The tree provides orientation, up and down, heaven and underworld, sacred and profane. The tree defines the coordinates of existence. But why a tree specifically? Some scholars suggest it's metaphorical. Trees are the largest living things connecting earth and sky, so they naturally become symbols of cosmic connection. Others point to astronomy. The Milky Way, stretching across the night sky, appears as a luminous tree or river in many cultures. The Maya called it the White Road and saw it as the world tree's trunk. Norse sources occasionally identify Yggdrasil with the Milky Way. The galactic center lies in Sagittarius, and during certain epochs, the Milky Way appears to rise from the horizon like a tree. Ancient astronomers may have seen the galaxy itself as the cosmic tree. Then there's the serpent. In Norse myth, Nidhogg gnaws at Yggdrasil's roots, a force of destruction threatening cosmic order. In Eden, the serpent offers forbidden knowledge, acting as tempter but also liberator. In Maya cosmology, the vision serpent emerges from offerings and carries messages between worlds. It's a conduit of communication with the divine. The serpent is never neutral. It represents transformation, hidden knowledge, danger, and power. In Hindu tradition, the Nagas are serpent deities who guard treasures and esoteric wisdom. They're neither good nor evil. They reward respect and punish disrespect. In ancient Egypt, the uraeus, the rearing cobra, adorns the pharaoh's crown, symbolizing divine authority and protection. Wadjet, the cobra goddess, guards Lower Egypt. The serpent Apophis threatens cosmic order by attacking Ra's sunboat each night, but protective deities defeat it, ensuring the sun rises again. In Greek myth, Python guards the oracle at Delphi until Apollo slays it. The oracle continues, but now serves Apollo rather than the older, chthonic powers the serpent represented. Asclepios, god of medicine, carries a staff with a serpent coiled around it, still the symbol of healing. Serpents shed their skin and appear renewed. They symbolize transformation and regeneration. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent, combining earthly serpent wisdom with celestial bird knowledge. He bridges the gap between material and spiritual, between human and divine. The Aztecs, Toltecs, and Maya all revered the feathered serpent as the bringer of civilization. Pyramid temples dedicated to Quetzalcoatl show serpent heads at the base of staircases, with the serpent's body running up the steps, the serpent as the path to ascension. In Australian Aboriginal tradition, the rainbow serpent creates waterholes and rivers, shapes the landscape, and establishes law. It's simultaneously creative and destructive, bringing life-giving water, but also floods and storms. In Chinese cosmology, the dragon, a serpentine creature, controls water, weather, and prosperity. The emperor's throne is the dragon throne. Dragons are benevolent, wise, and powerful, the opposite of Western dragons. The serpent, across cultures, represents threshold knowledge, wisdom that transforms but also dangers. To approach the serpent is to risk everything. To gain its knowledge is to become something other than you were. The Garden of Eden story encodes this perfectly. The serpent tells Eve that eating the forbidden fruit will make her like God, knowing good and evil. This is presented as temptation, but the serpent tells the truth. After they eat, God confirms it. Behold, the man has become like one of us. The price of knowledge is exile from innocence. Adam and Eve gain understanding but lose the garden. They become mortal, subject to toil, pain, and death. But they also become capable of choice, of moral reasoning, of creating civilization. The serpent offers the same bargain everywhere: knowledge in exchange for innocence, power in exchange for peace, transformation in exchange for safety. This is why the serpent appears at the base of the world tree. The tree represents cosmic order. The serpent represents the force that challenges that order, not to destroy it, but to transform it. In Norse myth, Nidhogg gnaws at Yggdrasil's roots, but the tree doesn't fall. The tension between creation and destruction maintains the universe. If either force dominated completely, existence would end, either frozen in perfect stasis or dissolved in chaos. The serpent isn't evil, it's necessary. Christianity demonized the serpent, identifying it with Satan. But even in Christian tradition, the serpent's role is ambiguous. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." He's referring to Numbers, where Moses fashioned a bronze serpent and mounted it on a pole. Anyone bitten by venomous snakes who looked at the bronze serpent would be healed. The serpent becomes a symbol of salvation. In Gnostic Christianity, the serpent in Eden is reinterpreted as a liberator, bringing knowledge to humans trapped in material existence by an ignorant creator god. This inversion disturbed Orthodox Christians, but it preserved an older understanding, the serpent as teacher. The tree and the serpent together form a complete symbol system. The tree is structure, order, hierarchy, connection between realms. The serpent is energy, transformation, knowledge, the force that moves through structure and changes it. In Kundalini Yoga, the serpent power coiled at the base of the spine must rise through the chakras, energy centers aligned like branches on a tree, to achieve enlightenment. The serpent ascending the tree is consciousness ascending through levels of reality. In alchemy, the caduceus, the staff with two serpents intertwined, represents the union of opposites necessary for transformation. The staff is the axis, the serpents are the opposing forces that spiral around it. DNA, the molecule that carries the code of life, is a double helix, two serpents spiraling around a central axis. Molecular biologist Jeremy Narby has argued that shamanic visions of serpents and cosmic trees may be human consciousness perceiving DNA itself, the biological code that structures life. In ayahuasca ceremonies, shamans consistently report seeing serpents, ladders, and vines connecting earth to sky. These visions appear across cultures that had no contact. Whether literal or metaphorical, the tree and serpent encode deep truth about the structure of existence. There's another element that appears consistently: water. In Norse myth, three wells lie at the roots of Yggdrasil: the well of Urd, tended by the Norns who weave fate; the well of Mimir, containing wisdom. Odin sacrifices an eye to drink from it; the spring of Hvergelmir, source of many rivers. In Genesis, 4 rivers flow from Eden: the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. The garden is watered by a mist rising from the earth. In Revelation, the tree of life stands on either side of the river of the water of life, flowing from the throne of God. Hindu tradition places the cosmic tree at the source of the Ganges, the sacred river that flows from heaven through Shiva's hair to earth. Maya cosmology depicts the world tree growing from the primordial waters of creation. Mesopotamian tradition places the tree of life in the Abzu, the primordial fresh water beneath the earth where Enki dwells. Water represents the source, the undifferentiated potential from which all forms emerge. The tree grows from water, draws life from it, and channels it upward. Creation myths consistently begin with water. Genesis. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. The Enuma Elish, Apsu and Tiamat, fresh water and salt water, mingling to birth the gods. Egyptian creation. The primordial mound emerges from none, the infinite ocean of chaos. Hindu cosmology. Vishnu sleeps on the cosmic serpent, Ananta, floating on the ocean of milk, and from his navel grows a lotus containing Brahma the creator. Chinese creation. Pangu emerges from the cosmic egg floating in chaos waters, and separates yin from yang, creating earth and sky. Polynesian creation. In the beginning was only water and darkness. Then the gods separated earth from sky, creating space for life. Water is the original state. Creation is the emergence of form from formlessness. Destruction is the return to primordial waters. The flood myths aren't just about punishment. They're about uncreation. The world returns to its original watery state. Then, from the survivors, a new creation emerges. The world tree grows from these waters. It's the first act of the new creation, the axis around which the world reorganizes. This is why sacred trees are so often associated with water. The Bodhi tree grew near a river. Yggdrasil's roots touch the wells. The tree of life stands beside the river in the New Jerusalem. Pilgrimage sites cluster around sacred trees near water. Lourdes, Ganges Ghats, the Zamzam well in Mecca. Water and tree together represent the complete cycle, potential and manifestation, chaos and order, death and life. The serpent adds the third element, motion, transformation, the force that mediates between water and tree, between potential and form. These three symbols, tree, serpent, water, appear together so consistently that they form a universal mythic language. When cultures separated by oceans and millennia use the same vocabulary, two explanations present themselves. Either these symbols emerge naturally from universal human psychology, archetypes hardwired into consciousness, or their memory, fragments of a lost symbolic system that predates the dispersal of human populations. Jung favored the first explanation. The collective unconscious generates the same symbols because all humans share the same cognitive architecture. But mythology itself suggests the second explanation. The myths say there was a time before the flood when knowledge was shared directly by divine teachers. After the catastrophe, humanity scattered. Each population carried fragments of the original wisdom. The tree, the serpent, the water, these are pieces of that lost language. We still speak it, though we've forgotten what it means. They came from the sky, not as metaphor, not as poetic imagery. The ancient texts are clear. They descended in vehicles. They walked among humans. They taught the arts of civilization. Then they left. Sumerian tradition preserves the most detailed account. The Apkallu, 7 sages sent by Enki before the flood, taught humanity writing, mathematics, architecture, agriculture, and law. They were described as semi-divine, part human, part fish, sometimes with wings. The oldest depictions show them as bearded men with fish cloaks, the fish skin draped over their heads and down their backs like a robe. This might represent protective suits or ceremonial garments. Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in the 3rd century BC, preserved the story of Oannes. In the first year appeared an animal endowed with human reason, named Oannes, who rose from out of the Erythraean Sea. Oannes emerged from the Persian Gulf and walked onto land. He had the whole body of a fish, but above the fish's head, he had another head, which was that of a man. The description suggests someone wearing a fish-like garment or helmet. This being was accustomed to pass the day among men, but took no food. He gave them an insight into letters and sciences and arts of every kind. He taught them to construct cities and temples, to compile laws, and to understand geometry and agriculture. And when the sun set, this being Oannes used to plunge into the sea again and spend the nights in the deep, for he was amphibious. 6 more sages appeared after Oannes, each bringing more knowledge. After the 7th sage, the flood came. The Apkallu ceased appearing in their original form. Later, Mesopotamian texts speak of human sages who inherited the Apkallu's knowledge but lacked their divine nature. The pattern, divine teachers appear, transform society, then withdraw after catastrophe, repeats globally. In Egypt, Thoth, called Jehuti in Egyptian, gave humanity writing, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and magic. He was depicted with the head of an ibis, or sometimes a baboon. Later, Greek tradition identified him with Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. Hermetic texts claim Thoth wrote thousands of books containing all knowledge. Most were lost, but fragments survived in Greek translations. The Hermetic corpus describes Thoth teaching the mysteries of creation, the nature of reality, and the path to divine knowledge. Egyptian tradition places Thoth in the first time, Zep Tepi, when gods walked the earth. After the gods withdrew, the pharaohs served as intermediaries, maintaining the knowledge Thoth had taught. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl appeared to multiple cultures: Olmecs, Toltecs, Aztecs, Maya. Each culture remembered him slightly differently, but the core story remained consistent. He was tall, bearded, light-skinned, unlike the indigenous population. He wore long robes and taught astronomy, agriculture, mathematics, architecture, and law. The Toltecs remembered him as a historical king who ruled from Tula around 900 AD, but older traditions place him much earlier, in the time after the Great Flood when the world was remade. He taught the cultivation of maize, which transformed Mesoamerican society. Wild teosinte, maize's ancestor, is barely edible. Domesticated maize is one of the most productive crops ever developed. The transformation required sophisticated selective breeding over many generations. Who taught this? The Maya said Kukulkan, another name for Quetzalcoatl, gave them the calendar. The long count calendar begins on a date corresponding to August 11th, 3114 BC. Why that date? The Maya said it marked the creation of the current world age. The calendar tracks Venus with extraordinary precision. The Maya calculated Venus's synodic period, the time between successive appearances in the same position, as 584 days. Modern astronomy calculates 583.92 days. They tracked Venus for centuries, noting every appearance and disappearance. They knew Venus appeared as morning star for 263 days, disappeared for 50 days behind the sun, reappeared as evening star for 263 days, then disappeared for 8 days before reappearing as morning star. This knowledge required generations of meticulous observation and sophisticated mathematics. Or it required a teacher who already knew. In the Andes, Viracocha appeared after a great flood had destroyed previous civilizations. Inca tradition describes him as tall, bearded, wearing a long white robe, carrying a staff. He walked through the Andes performing miracles and teaching. At Tiahuanaco, near Lake Titicaca, he created humanity from clay and gave each people their languages and customs. Tiahuanaco itself is an enigma. At 12,000 feet elevation, massive stone structures rise from the plain. The Gateway of the Sun weighs 10 tons and is carved from a single andesite block with precision that's difficult to replicate today. The stones at Pumapunku, part of the Tiahuanaco complex, are cut with such precision that some surfaces are flat to within a few thousandths of an inch. H-shaped blocks, weighing up to 130 tons, fit together perfectly. Conventional archaeology dates Tiahuanaco to around 500 AD, but some researchers note that the site sits on the ancient shoreline of Lake Titicaca. The lake was much larger in the past, geological evidence suggests it was once at Tiahuanaco's elevation. If the city was built as a port, it could be thousands of years older. After teaching at Tiahuanaco, Viracocha walked westward across the Andes to the Pacific coast. He stepped onto the ocean and walked across the water, disappearing toward the setting sun. He promised to return. When Francisco Pizarro arrived in 1532, Inca leaders wondered if this might be Viracocha returning. The timing seemed right. The bearded, light-skinned strangers came from across the ocean, just as prophecy suggested. This belief contributed to the Spanish conquest. The Inca initially welcomed the invaders as fulfillment of ancient prophecy. The same pattern appeared in Mexico. When Cortés landed in 1519, it was Quetzalcoatl, the year one read in the Aztec calendar. This was the prophesied year of Quetzalcoatl's return. Emperor Moctezuma sent emissaries bearing gifts and ritual regalia, testing whether Cortés was indeed the returning god. The Aztecs' hesitation and confusion during the initial contact gave the Spanish crucial advantages. These weren't primitive peoples naively mistaking humans for gods. They were sophisticated civilizations acting on specific prophecies. Their ancestors had been taught by bearded, light-skinned teachers who came from the sea. Those teachers had promised to return. The timing matched. The description matched. Of course they wondered. In West Africa, the Dogon people preserved detailed astronomical knowledge passed down through oral tradition. French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and Germain Dieterlen, working with the Dogon in the 1940s, documented their cosmology. The Dogon described Sirius as a triple star system. To the naked eye, Sirius appears as a single bright star, but the Dogon knew about Sirius B, a white dwarf companion star invisible without a telescope. They knew it was small, dense, and extraordinarily heavy. They knew its orbital period around Sirius A, 50 years. Sirius B wasn't discovered by Western astronomy until 1862. Its extreme density wasn't understood until the 1920s. How did the Dogon know? They said the Nommo taught them. The Nommo were amphibious beings who descended from Sirius in an ark that spun and made a loud noise. They came to teach humanity. After fulfilling their mission, they returned to the sky. Skeptics argue the Dogon learned about Sirius B from Western visitors in the early 20th century. But the Dogon astronomical traditions date back centuries in their oral history. Their cosmology is deeply integrated into their culture, art, and ritual, not a recent addition. The description of the Nommo matches descriptions of teachers across cultures. Amphibious, like Oannes emerging from the Persian Gulf, arriving in a loud spinning vessel, like the Vimanas of Vedic texts, teaching astronomy and cosmic knowledge, departing after completing their mission. Hindu texts preserve the most detailed descriptions of these teachers and their vehicles. The Ramayana and Mahabharata describe Vimanas, flying palaces or chariots used by gods and advanced humans. The descriptions are remarkably specific. The Pushpaka Vimana belonging to Ravana is described as a huge flying palace that could accommodate thousands. It could fly anywhere its pilot commanded at tremendous speed. When Rama wins it from Ravana, the text describes its interior, many rooms, gardens, even lakes. The Mahabharata describes aerial battles between Vimanas. Gifted with great energy, the Daitya hurled a terrible iron dart. The dart, approaching with great force, struck the chariot of the god. The dart, charged with energy, blazing forth in splendor, destroyed the chariot. These descriptions sound like combat between aircraft. The Vaimanika Shastra, a controversial text claimed to be ancient but probably compiled in the early 20th century, provides technical specifications for Vimanas. While the text's authenticity is disputed, it may preserve fragments of older knowledge. It describes different types of Vimanas, some for long distances, some for combat, some for observation. It lists metals used in construction, propulsion methods, navigation systems. Even if the Vaimanika Shastra is a modern compilation, it's based on descriptions from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are genuinely ancient. The prophet Ezekiel, in the Hebrew Bible, describes encountering a divine chariot in extraordinary detail. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud, with brightness round about it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were gleaming bronze. He describes 4 living creatures with wheels beside them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the 4 had the same likeness, their construction being as it were a wheel within a wheel. The wheels could move in any direction without turning, and their rims were tall and awesome, and the rims of all 4 were full of eyes round about. NASA engineer Joseph Blumrich, intrigued by this description, analyzed whether it could represent an actual vehicle. He concluded the description matched a helicopter-like craft with 4 rotors and landing legs with wheels. The eyes around the rims could be lights or portholes. Blumrich even patented an improved omnidirectional wheel based on Ezekiel's description. Whether or not Ezekiel saw an actual spacecraft, his description matches the pattern. Divine beings travel in technological vehicles. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers descending to Mount Hermon in fiery chariots. They teach forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, weaponry, cosmetics, astronomy, and the cutting of roots, possibly pharmacology or agriculture. Their offspring, the Nephilim, become mighty warriors and giants, but their teachings corrupt humanity. God decides to cleanse the earth with a flood. After the flood, the Watchers are imprisoned, and direct divine interaction with humanity largely ceases. This matches the Sumerian pattern. The Apkallu teach before the flood, then cease appearing in their original form. Across cultures, the story is consistent. Advanced beings, gods, angels, sages, descend from the sky in vehicles. They walk among humans and teach the foundations of civilization. Sometimes they interbreed with humans. Then catastrophe strikes, usually flood. After the catastrophe, direct contact largely ends. Humanity is left with inherited knowledge, but without the teachers. 3 possible explanations present themselves. First, these are primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. Thunder becomes a sky god. The sun becomes a chariot. Comets become divine vehicles. But this doesn't explain the specificity. Why do the texts distinguish between natural clouds and divine vehicles? Why do they provide technical details about propulsion, navigation, weapons? Second, these are metaphorical descriptions of spiritual experiences. The ascents to heaven are mystical visions. The divine teachers are personifications of human insight. The vehicles are poetic imagery. This explanation preserves the spiritual significance while dismissing the literal details, but it requires assuming ancient peoples couldn't distinguish between literal and metaphorical truth. Third, these are historical memories preserved in mythic form. Something happened in deep prehistory. Advanced beings, whether gods, aliens, or survivors of an earlier civilization, taught primitive humans. After a catastrophe, they withdrew. The knowledge they imparted allowed the rapid development of civilization after the Ice Age. This theory doesn't require dismissing the myths as fiction. It treats them as history encoded in symbolic language. The myths themselves insist on this reading. They don't present the teachers as abstract principles. They name them, describe their physical appearance, detail their teachings, note where they came from and where they went. Either humanity independently invented the same detailed story across the globe, or humanity remembers. Numbers don't lie. Embedded in ancient structures and calendars are mathematical constants that shouldn't be there, precision that exceeds the supposed capabilities of the builders, knowledge encoded in stone and star charts. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the most precisely constructed building in the ancient world. Its base covers 13 acres. Each side measures 755 feet and aligns to the cardinal directions within 3/60ths of a single degree. The longest side differs from the shortest by less than 8 inches. This precision is astonishing. Modern surveying equipment can barely match it. But the real mystery lies in its proportions. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height is exactly 2 times pi. If you divide the perimeter of the base by twice the height, you get 3.1415, pi to 5 decimal places. This can't be coincidence. To achieve this ratio, the builders needed to know pi precisely. But according to conventional history, pi wasn't calculated to this accuracy until the Greek mathematician Archimedes, 2,000 years after the pyramid was built. The pyramid also encodes phi, the golden ratio, 1.618. The ratio of the slant height to half the base length equals pi. Phi appears throughout nature, in nautilus shells, flower petals, spiral galaxies. It represents the most aesthetically pleasing proportions. The ancient Greeks considered it divine. The Egyptians, 1,500 years earlier, built it into the Great Pyramid. The pyramid's dimensions also encode astronomical constants. The height multiplied by 1 billion approximately equals the distance from Earth to the Sun, 93 million miles. This distance, called the astronomical unit, wasn't accurately measured until the 20th century. Skeptics argue these are coincidences. With enough measurements, you can find any number you're looking for. But the patterns are too consistent. The pyramid sits at 29.9792 degrees north latitude. The speed of light in a vacuum is 299,792 kilometers per second. Coincidence? The meter wasn't defined until 1791, and the speed of light wasn't measured accurately until the 19th century. Yet the correlation exists. Either the pyramid's latitude was chosen deliberately to encode the speed of light, or the meter was unconsciously defined based on Earth's proportions, which the pyramid also encodes. Or it's extraordinary coincidence. The pyramid's construction itself defies explanation. It contains over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. Some blocks in the king's chamber weigh up to 80 tons. According to conventional chronology, it was built in 20 years during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, around 2560 BC. That means placing one block every 2 minutes, working day and night for 2 decades. Modern engineers struggle to explain how this was accomplished with copper tools and wooden ramps. The stones are cut so precisely that a knife blade can't fit between them. The corners are nearly perfect right angles. The faces are flat to within fractions of an inch across hundreds of feet. Some researchers suggest the pyramid is older than conventional dating indicates. Robert Schoch's geological analysis of the Sphinx shows water erosion consistent with heavy rainfall. The Giza Plateau hasn't experienced that level of rainfall since before 5000 BC. If the Sphinx is older, the pyramids might be too. Egyptian tradition supports this. The inventory. Stela, found at Giza, states that Khufu ordered the restoration of the Sphinx and the pyramids, not their construction. Mainstream Egyptology dismisses this as later mythology. But what if it preserves accurate memory? The Egyptians themselves said the pyramids were ancient when the pharaohs ruled. They attributed them to the gods of the first time. Similar precision appears at sites across the world. At Machu Picchu in Peru, stones weighing 50 tons fit together so tightly that a sheet of paper can't slide between them. The blocks have irregular interlocking shapes, each one unique. Cutting and fitting such stones would challenge modern technology. The Inca said they didn't build these structures. They said they were made by the gods or by giants who lived before the flood. At Sacsayhuaman, near Cuzco, stones weighing up to 200 tons fit together with impossible precision. Some blocks have more than 12 angles, each fitting perfectly with neighboring stones. Spanish chroniclers recorded Inca traditions that these walls were built by Viracocha's followers using a plant that softened stone. Modern researchers dismiss this as legend, but no one has successfully explained how the construction was actually achieved. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, andesite blocks are cut with precision that approaches machine tooling. Flat surfaces are accurate to within a few thousandths of an inch. Right angles are perfect. Holes are drilled with parallel sides. Andesite ranks 6.5 on the Mohs hardness scale. Copper tools, which the pre-Columbian Andeans supposedly used, rank 3.5. You can't cut harder material with softer tools. Yet the stones are cut. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter sits atop even older foundations. These foundations include the trilithon, 3 stones each weighing over 800 tons. Nearly a quarter mile away in the quarry sits the stone of the pregnant woman, 1,000 tons of precisely cut limestone. Beside it lies an even larger stone, 1,650 tons. No known ancient or medieval technology could move these stones. The largest crane in the world today can lift about 20,000 tons, but it weighs 45,000 tons itself and requires extensive preparation. Who cut and moved the stones of Baalbek? Local tradition says they were placed by giants before the flood. The mathematics encoded in these structures suggests advanced knowledge. At Stonehenge, the stones align with solar and lunar events. The monument tracks the 18.6-year cycle of lunar standstills. This requires generations of careful observation and sophisticated mathematics. The Maya calendar demonstrates mathematical sophistication that rivals modern astronomy. They calculated the solar year as 365.2420 days. Modern astronomy calculates 365.2422 days. The Maya were accurate to within 17 seconds per year. They tracked Venus with similar precision, 584 days for the synodic period versus the actual 583.92. They predicted eclipses using the Saros cycle, a period of 223 lunar months after which eclipses repeat. This knowledge requires centuries of observation. The Dresden Codex, a Maya book dating to the 11th century, contains tables tracking Venus over hundreds of years. The precision is extraordinary. How did they achieve this without telescopes or modern instruments? The Maya said Kukulkan taught them. The Sumerians developed sophisticated mathematics based on the number 60. This is why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. Base 60 is actually superior to base 10 for many calculations. 60 has 12 factors. It's evenly divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60. This makes fractions easier. The Sumerians also understood the precession of the equinoxes, the 26,000-year cycle caused by Earth's axial wobble. This cycle is invisible to casual observation. It takes centuries of careful measurements to detect, yet Sumerian astronomical tablets track it. Ancient Indian texts also demonstrate knowledge of precession. The Surya Siddhanta, an astronomical treatise possibly dating to 1000 BC or earlier, calculates the precession cycle as 25,770 years. Modern astronomy calculates 25,772 years. The text also gives the diameter of Earth as 8,000 miles, remarkably close to the actual 7,926 miles. How did ancient Indians measure the Earth's diameter? The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a shipwreck off Greece, dates to around 100 BC. It's a complex gear-driven device that calculated astronomical positions and predicted eclipses. When researchers X-rayed it, they found over 30 bronze gears with precise tooth counts and differential ratios. It's essentially an analog computer. Nothing of comparable complexity appears in the historical record for another 1,000 years. Where did the knowledge to build it come from? The Baghdad battery, dating to 250 BC to 640 AD, consists of a clay jar with a copper cylinder and iron rod. When filled with acidic liquid, it produces electric current. Why would ancient Mesopotamians need batteries? Some researchers suggest they were used for electroplating, coating objects with thin layers of gold or silver. Ancient gold work shows evidence of techniques that might require electricity. These anomalies suggest knowledge that shouldn't exist in the ancient world. Either ancient peoples were far more advanced than we credit, or they inherited knowledge from an earlier source. The myths support the second explanation. They consistently describe divine teachers imparting knowledge: mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, architecture, metallurgy. After catastrophe, this knowledge became fragmented. Each culture preserved different pieces. The Egyptians excelled at engineering and geometry. The Maya mastered astronomy and calendars. The Sumerians developed writing and mathematics. The Andeans achieved impossible stonework. Each civilization seemed to start with advanced knowledge that gradually degraded rather than gradually improving from primitive origins. Egyptian pyramid construction became less sophisticated over time, not more. The earliest pyramids show the most precision. Later pyramids are cruder, as if the knowledge was fading. The same pattern appears in Mesoamerica. The oldest structures are often the most sophisticated. This contradicts the standard model of cultural evolution, which assumes steady progress from simple to complex. But it matches the mythic model: advanced knowledge imparted at the beginning, gradually lost or corrupted over time. The numbers don't lie. Embedded in ancient structures is knowledge that shouldn't be there. Either we've dramatically underestimated ancient capabilities, or someone taught them. Different names, different languages, same story. When you strip away cultural variations, when you look past the local details, the universal myths reveal a single narrative. In the beginning, there was water and chaos. Order emerged, sometimes through violent conflict, sometimes through divine will, sometimes through natural evolution. The world was structured, a tree or mountain or pillar connecting the realms. Gods or advanced beings descended and taught humanity. There was a golden age, direct communication between divine and human. Then catastrophe, usually flood, sometimes fire or ice. The world was destroyed. A few survived. The survivors rebuilt, carrying fragments of the old knowledge. The gods withdrew or diminished. Humanity was left to struggle alone. But the promise remains: the teachers will return. This is the universal story. Sumerian, Egyptian, Hebrew, Greek, Norse, Hindu, Chinese, Maya, Aztec, Inca, Aboriginal, Pacific Islander, Native American, all tell versions of this tale. The details vary, but the structure holds. Comparative mythology reveals these parallels. Zeus, Jupiter, Odin, Indra, Enlil, different names for the same archetype, the sky god who rules through storms and law. Osiris, Dionysus, Balder, Tammuz, Quetzalcoatl, different names for the same archetype, the god who dies and rises, promising transformation. The serpent in Eden, the Nagas, Quetzalcoatl, the rainbow serpent, Nidhogg, different names for the same archetype, the serpent who guards knowledge and represents transformation. Linguists have traced connections between cultures through shared words and concepts. The Proto-Indo-European language, reconstructed from similarities between Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Germanic, and Celtic languages, suggests a common origin. These cultures share not just vocabulary, but also mythic structures. The sky god has similar names across Indo-European languages. Dyaus Pater in Proto-Indo-European becomes Zeus Pater in Greek, Jupiter in Latin, Dyaus in Sanskrit, all mean Sky Father. This linguistic connection proves cultural contact at some point in the distant past. But the myths also appear in cultures with no linguistic connection to Indo-European. The Maya, isolated from Eurasia for over 10,000 years, tell the same stories. The Aboriginal Australians, separated for 50,000 years, remember the same catastrophe. Language alone can't explain the parallels. Carl Jung proposed the collective unconscious, a shared psychological substrate that generates the same symbols across cultures. Archetypes arise naturally from the structure of the human mind. The mother, the father, the trickster, the hero, the shadow. These patterns are hardwired into consciousness. Jung's theory explains why different cultures create similar stories. We all share the same cognitive architecture, so we naturally generate the same narratives. But Jung himself acknowledged that archetypes needed some historical or experiential basis. They're not abstract patterns, but responses to real conditions. The flood archetype arises because humanity experienced catastrophic flooding at the end of the Ice Age. The dying god archetype emerges from witnessing agricultural cycles and seasonal death. The divine teacher archetype reflects real cultural transmission. Archetypes are memory encoded in symbolic form. Joseph Campbell, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, mapped the monomyth, the single story underlying all hero tales. The hero receives a call to adventure. He crosses a threshold into the unknown. He faces trials and gains supernatural aid. He confronts the ultimate ordeal, often descending to death. He returns transformed, bearing gifts for his people. This pattern appears in myths worldwide: Gilgamesh, Odysseus, Buddha, Jesus, Quetzalcoatl. Campbell argued, this reflects the universal human experience of transformation. Every person must leave the familiar, confront the unknown, and return changed. But the monomyth also describes actual events: explorers who ventured into unknown lands, learned from other cultures, and returned with new knowledge. The myths might be both psychological pattern and historical memory. Mircea Eliade studied the concept of sacred time versus profane time. Traditional cultures distinguish between ordinary time, the linear progression of daily life, and sacred time, the eternal realm of myth. Rituals allow entry into sacred time, reenacting the original creative acts. When a priest performs a ritual, he becomes the god. When a community celebrates a festival, they return to the first time. This explains why myths are told in present tense. They're not past events, but eternal realities. But Eliade also noted that sacred time often references a specific historical moment: the creation of the world, the flood, the arrival of culture heroes. Myth connects eternal patterns to historical events. The unity behind the myths suggests either universal human psychology or shared historical experience, or both. Perhaps human psychology developed the way it did because of shared historical experiences. We create stories about floods because our ancestors survived floods. We create stories about divine teachers because our ancestors were taught. We create stories about lost golden ages because there were golden ages that were lost. The myths themselves insist on historical basis. They provide dates, names, locations. They distinguish between mythic events and contemporary events. They preserve genealogies connecting present rulers to ancient gods. The Sumerian king list traces kings back through the flood to antediluvian rulers. The Genesis genealogies trace Hebrews back to Adam. Egyptian king lists reach back to the first time when gods ruled. Maya texts trace lineages to the hero twins and the gods of creation. These aren't presented as metaphor. They're historical records. Modern historians dismiss the early entries as myth. But what if ancient record keepers were more accurate than we credit? What if the myths preserve real events distorted by time and retelling, but fundamentally accurate. The unity of the myths suggests a single source, either a shared human psychology that naturally generates these patterns, or a shared human history that these patterns remember. The first explanation requires assuming ancient peoples across the globe independently invented identical detailed narratives. The second explanation requires assuming something happened in prehistory that all cultures remembered. Which is more plausible? That hundreds of isolated cultures coincidentally invented stories about a global flood with survivors in boats, divine teachers who descended from the sky, serpents offering knowledge, world trees connecting realms, dying gods who promised resurrection. Or that these things happened and the memory survived in myth. What if the myths are right? Not symbolically right, not metaphorically right, literally right. There was a civilization before, advanced enough to build monuments, study the stars, develop sophisticated mathematics. Then catastrophe struck, flood, fire, cosmic impact. The civilization was destroyed, most knowledge was lost. Survivors scattered across the world, carrying fragments of the old wisdom. They taught the primitive peoples they encountered. Those peoples remembered the teachers as gods. This is the lost civilization hypothesis. Mainstream archaeology rejects it. The consensus holds that civilization arose independently in several locations around 3,500 BC. Before that, humans were hunter-gatherers with stone tools. There's no room in this timeline for an earlier advanced civilization. But the evidence keeps appearing. Göbekli Tepe shouldn't exist according to conventional chronology. It's a massive temple complex built around 9,600 BC by people who supposedly had no agriculture, no cities, no complex social organization. The site required coordinating hundreds of workers to quarry, transport, carve, and erect 16-ton pillars. It required feeding and housing those workers. It required a social structure capable of organizing the project. Where did this capability come from? Either humans were far more advanced at this early date than we've assumed, or they were taught by someone who had preserved knowledge from an earlier time. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried around 8,000 BC. Someone carefully filled in the entire complex with debris and abandoned it. Why bury something you worked so hard to build? Perhaps to preserve it, perhaps as a time capsule for future generations. Around the same period, agriculture suddenly appeared in multiple locations: the Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze Valley, Mesoamerica, the Andes. Wild grains don't easily become domesticated crops. It requires selective breeding over many generations. Someone has to recognize which plants have desirable traits, save their seeds, replant them, repeat for decades. Hunter-gatherers moving constantly wouldn't have the stability to conduct multi-generational breeding programs. Yet somehow, in several locations simultaneously, humans figured it out. The myths say divine teachers gave them agriculture. Osiris taught the Egyptians. Quetzalcoatl taught Mesoamericans. The Sumerian Apkallu taught irrigation. Chinese tradition credits divine emperors with teaching agriculture. What if these weren't gods but survivors of an earlier agricultural civilization? Plato's account of Atlantis, told to him by Egyptian priests, describes an advanced island civilization destroyed around 9,600 BC. Most scholars dismiss Atlantis as Plato's philosophical invention, but Plato insisted it was historical, passed down through Egyptian records. The priests told Solon that Greek memory was short. Their records went back much further. They remembered multiple catastrophes that had destroyed civilizations. They said Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune by earthquakes and floods. The date, 1960 BC, coincides with the end of the Younger Dryas and the beginning of rapid climate change. It's also when Göbekli Tepe was built. Whether or not a place called Atlantis existed, something happened at this time that disrupted the world. Graham Hancock has argued for decades that an advanced civilization existed during the Ice Age and was destroyed by the cataclysms around 10,000 BC. He points to underwater structures off the coasts of India, Japan, the Mediterranean, that appear to be man-made and are dated to periods when the sea level was lower. The Yonaguni monument off Japan consists of massive stone terraces with right angles and flat surfaces. Geologists debate whether it's natural or artificial. If artificial, it would have been constructed when the area was above water, over 10,000 years ago. Dwarka, off the coast of India, shows underwater structures that appear to be walls and buildings. Hindu texts describe Dwarka as Krishna's city, swallowed by the sea after his death. The Gulf of Cambay, also off India, contains underwater acoustic images suggesting a grid pattern of streets and buildings. Artifacts recovered from the site date to 9,500 years ago. These underwater sites suggest coastal civilizations drowned when sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. Most human settlements throughout history have been on coasts. If a civilization existed 12,000 years ago, its major cities would have been on coasts that are now hundreds of feet underwater. We're looking for evidence in the wrong places. Or perhaps we found evidence and dismissed it as anomalous. The Peary Race map, drawn in 1513 AD, shows the coast of Antarctica with remarkable accuracy. It depicts the coastline as it would appear without ice. Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820. It wasn't mapped accurately until the 20th century, and it's been covered in ice for thousands of years. Peary Race noted on the map that he compiled it from older sources, some dating to Alexander the Great's time or earlier. Either the map is coincidentally accurate, or it copies information from a time when Antarctica was ice-free and someone was there to map it. Antarctica was last ice-free over 6,000 years ago, possibly much longer. The Orontius Phineas map from 1531 also shows Antarctica surprisingly accurately, including mountain ranges that weren't discovered until the 1950s, using sonar through the ice. The Buach map from 1737 shows Antarctica as two separate landmasses, which is correct. Beneath the ice, Antarctica is actually two large islands. This wasn't discovered until the International Geophysical Year in 1958. How did 18th century cartographers know? They claimed to be copying ancient maps. Professor Charles Hapgood studied these anomalous maps and concluded they showed evidence of an ancient seafaring civilization with advanced cartographic knowledge. He proposed that Earth's crust occasionally shifts relative to the mantle, a catastrophic pole shift that would dramatically alter climate zones. Antarctica might have been temperate and habitable, then shifted to the polar region. Mainstream geology rejects crustal displacement as too rapid, but something caused rapid climate change at the end of the Ice Age. The evidence for a lost civilization remains circumstantial but accumulating. Sophisticated astronomical knowledge appearing in the earliest civilizations. Mathematical constants encoded in ancient monuments. Megalithic structures requiring technology we can't explain. Universal myths describing teachers who brought civilization. Underwater structures suggesting drowned coastal cities. Ancient maps showing lands that couldn't have been known. Each piece of evidence can be dismissed individually, but together they form a pattern. The pattern suggests knowledge from an earlier source. Whether that source was gods, aliens, or simply an earlier human civilization, the myths are consistent. Someone taught, someone knew, then the knowledge was lost. We've been trying to rediscover it ever since. We stand at the edge of the same ocean our ancestors stood beside 12,000 years ago. The water has risen, the coastlines have changed, but the stars above remain the same. and somewhere in the depths of memory, we carry their stories. Not as metaphor, not as fantasy, but as the last fragments of something real. From Sumer to the Maya, from Egypt to Scandinavia, from the Andes to Australia, humanity tells the same story. There was a world before this one. Teachers came from the sky and walked among us. They taught the arts of civilization, writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, law. A great catastrophe struck, water covering the world, fire from heaven, the earth shaking. The teachers withdrew or were destroyed. Survivors rebuilt, carrying fragments of the old knowledge. This is not one culture's story, it's humanity's story. We've been trying to understand it for 5,000 years of recorded history. Scholars offer explanations, cultural diffusion, universal archetypes, coincidence. But the myths themselves resist these interpretations. They insist on their own reality. They provide dates, names, locations. They distinguish between mythic time and historical time. They claim to remember real events. What if they do? What if the flood really happened, not as divine punishment, but as geological catastrophe when the Ice Age ended? What if the divine teachers were real, not gods, but survivors of an earlier civilization, or perhaps visitors from elsewhere, passing on knowledge? What if the monuments encode information we haven't yet deciphered, messages from those who came before? These questions challenge comfortable certainties. They suggest history is longer and stranger than we've imagined. They imply knowledge has been lost and found and lost again across deep time. But perhaps that's the lesson the myths teach. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge is gained and lost. Catastrophe periodically resets the world. Yet something persists. The stories survive, encoded in myth, preserved in ritual, carried in oral tradition. The tree connecting worlds, the serpent offering knowledge, the waters of creation and destruction, the dying God who promises return, the teachers from the sky. These symbols form a language older than writing, a language humanity once spoke fluently. We've forgotten the grammar, but we still recognize the words. When we encounter these myths, something resonates. Not because they're fanciful inventions, but because they're true. True in the way that matters most. They connect us to something larger than ourselves, to a history that extends beyond the narrow window of recorded civilization, to ancestors who witnessed wonders and terrors we can barely imagine, to the possibility that we're not the first to ask these questions or build these monuments or reach for the stars. The myths humble us. They remind us that we stand on foundations we didn't build. That knowledge isn't linear progress, but cycles of discovery and loss. That what we think we know might be fragments of what was once known completely. But the myths also inspire. They whisper that transformation is possible, that death leads to resurrection, that catastrophe isn't the end, but a new beginning. They promise that the teachers will return. Perhaps they already have. Perhaps we are the teachers now, tasked with remembering and preserving and passing forward. Perhaps the myths live through us, updated for each age but carrying the same essential truths. We build our monuments, not pyramids but space stations, not stone circles but particle accelerators. We study the stars as our ancestors did, now with telescopes that see across billions of light years. We encode knowledge in new forms, not clay tablets but silicon chips, not oral tradition but digital archives. But the questions remain the same. Where did we come from? What knowledge have we lost? What catastrophes might we face? Will we survive to teach the next generation? The myths don't provide definitive answers. They're not meant to. They're meant to keep us asking. to prevent us from becoming complacent in our certainties, to remind us that mystery surrounds us, that the past holds secrets, that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than any single story can capture. So we return to where we began, standing beside the ocean, looking at the stars, carrying stories passed down through hundreds of generations. Stories of gods who descended and taught us. Stories of floods that reset the world. Stories of death and resurrection, of knowledge lost and regained, of civilizations that rose and fell and rose again. These stories are our inheritance, not just entertainment or moral instruction, but memory. The memory of who we were, who we became, who we might be again. The memory before history. And in carrying that memory forward, we fulfill the ancient prophecy. The teachers return, not from the sky, but from within. We are the ones we've been waiting for.